All right, I believe we are live. Thanks, guys, for tuning in to another Note to File live. Really stoked to have Mitchell Hilbe on. Let's just jump right in, man. How's it going? First of all,
Yeah,
it's
good,
Thursday.
good. It
Week's
is.
almost over.
I'm ready for it. It's been a really long week. So, as with
Yeah,
most,
I
I suppose.
I I agree, and maybe probably more for you than many people, as you're juggling
Maybe.
some different things here than a lot of us are. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I'm giving you an opportunity
Yeah.
to tell us a bit about sort of how you got into the clinical trial space and kind of where you are today.
So, yeah, I mean, that's always a hot topic, right? And I see these discussions all the time on how do you break into the industry. And I won't shy away from admitting there's definitely a degree of nepotism there. My mom was oncology nurse by training and heavily involved, wore lots of different hats with companies as I was younger. So, growing up, I was exposed to it nonstop. I was able to work part time, doing various regulatory tasks and creating documents, doing AE ConMed cross checks for her when I was younger, and then that kind of just developed into me having an interest in medicine. Tried to carve my own path for a little while. Uh, Absolutely enjoyed being a paramedic and an instructor, but it really got to the point where it was a struggle to pay bills,
Right.
sadly enough. So Um, she had some friends. It's all about connections and networking. So she said, "Hey, Mitch might be interested in getting into research." And sure enough, so I started off and having a lot of benefit there with family connections, and since then it's grown. So CRA for geez, going on 8 years now, and recently this year ended up starting up my own SMO. So co-founded that. So.
Yeah, and I want to hear all about that. But I do. I mean, obviously, it's really cool to have that exposure.
Yeah.
At sort of a young age, because certainly, I I came in to the industry. I guess I was like in my mid 20s. I didn't even know this existed. Right? It's like
Right.
it seems like such a big world when you're inside of it, but if you're not, you'd have no idea it exists. And even when I try to
Yeah.
like explain to people what I do, I pretty much give up every time because it's so sort of, again, niche in a way. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. To your point, I'm seeing people now who are trying to on purpose enter clinical research, since a lot of us just sort of fell into it in various ways. And
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
it is who man. Get out there and network and meet some people and make some connections. I think that's really
Very much
still
so.
sort of
I mean,
undervalued.
there's a social media aspect now to it as well. So that's undeniable. We just didn't have the same resources to be aware when we were younger. You hear the occasional commercial on the radio for they're enrolling clinical trials near your university, and that's basically all the exposure most people got.
Yeah, that's true. And we're seeing, even here in Oklahoma City, there's a community college who has a program like for clinical research coordinators, which I thought was pretty cool, especially in a
Yeah.
place here where there's like we don't even have that much research, in Oklahoma. So it is nice to see. And then to your point, I think there's more people. I mean, LinkedIn obviously is like a huge
Yeah.
opportunity, and a lot of people sort of being more transparent, having more conversations, and just kind of putting the whole thing out there, which I think is of benefit to everyone.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I love that. And if you guys are watching, feel free to leave some comments. I love to, I always love to sort of open up these conversations. So please, guys,
Yeah.
don't
Let's
be
dive
shy.
into it.
So I want to talk about, and this is something I've observed. I've opened up I still struggle what to call it, SMO, IRO, site network,
I know.
whatever
I
you want to
agree.
say. Um, I guess I avoid SMO because I still feel like it has some kind of negative connotations for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Well, probably for good reason, but
100% agree. I'm right. I'm right there with you. I don't like saying it, but there's not a more appropriate term. So
it just seems like it's just the easiest for people to understand,
yeah.
in terms of what the model is. But um, I've had CRAs who come on site and they're like, "Oh, how did you start this? What are you using? How did you do it?" So, what sort of led you to have that? I guess what led you to want to do it in the first place?
So yeah, I mean that is a good question. I think I fall into that category with many other CRAs. I see those questions all the time, floating around LinkedIn in the space, because once you just have a certain amount of experience in the industry, I feel like almost everyone tends to get to a certain point where they want to make a change. Some people are happy being complacent, but whether you want to move up and grow through your current industry, whether you kind of want to make a parallel move to site ownership, site management, um, we all get to a certain point, and as a CRA with enough exposure to a variety of sites throughout the country, you're intimately familiar with all the different options and all the different ways of doing things. Um, so I think that's a big aspect from the CRA standpoint, at least for me, of saying, hey, maybe I can do this. And there might be some arrogance there as well, because it's not easy. Crash course in setting up a website was hard enough. So
No, but I think to your point, there's certainly, CRAs could be uniquely well suited because you get to see how sites are structured. You get to see the different models. You get to see the different tools and resources sites use. You get to see who sucks at it, who's good at it, take away lessons from both of those situations. And oftentimes as a site or a site manager, like you're sort of in a bubble, right? Like
yeah.
you got your head down, so you don't necessarily get the advantage of that sort of diversity of experience from a CRA. But on the other hand, do you feel that there are do you think there are unique skill sets to manage a site versus be an effective CRA? And is that a challenge, or do you feel like it's pretty
I mean,
intuitive?
they're different. So as a CRA, oftentimes it feels like we kind of get in there and it's like you're just grading homework sometimes is what it feels like. I never like to have that approach. I, I tend to have a good rapport with my sites that I still have. But as when you get into that management of a site aspect, um, it's there's so many other things that are almost top of mind as well. Because as CRA, we might be involved with, hey, how are you doing with recruitment, getting some information, but those are just simple conversations. You're not conducting that process. You're not participating in that process. So there's a much different aspect to that management side that there's no parallel there. I mean, at least I maybe I know some of the things that are going to go on that need to take place, but in order to translate skills, uh, regulatory, sure, data
Right.
entry, absolutely.
Did you or are you or did you find it more challenging than maybe what you initially expected, or were things that came up that you didn't expect that you were like, oh, well, I didn't even consider this from sort of the outside in.
So there are definitely some things where they were out of sight for me. As a CRA, we don't deal with generally anything financial, so that's why I proudly carry the co-founder title. As my CFO, he is all about contracts, negotiating budgets, working with site needs to make sure if we need staffing, what kind of conduct we would need for uh, the trials. Basically going down a checklist of everything he's done through his career of saying, well, these are what we need to make research possible at our sites, and this is how much we need to pay for it. Um, so in that sense, there's a lot that I don't know, and there's a lot that I still don't know. I mean,
Sure.
I'm involved in that aspect. We communicate about things like that, and always will. I'm always going to be involved in the contract process with our company, but there's still so much. It's not worth my time, essentially, to dive in there. I'm not going to take over trying to negotiate budgets. Um, this is not my experience base. So
Sure.
that was a
Well,
big challenge, but yeah.
well, let's talk. I mean, something that interests me is, again, having not sort of started, as a coordinator, but coming from the CRA side, something that overall, Jen, generally fascinates me is like the tools and resources sites use, because it varies so wildly. You've got sites still using Excel spreadsheets to track, and
Yeah.
then you've got sophisticated CTMS systems.
Yeah.
So I guess, how did you, or did you have enough sort of sufficient, experience at sites to see what's working, and then are there, what works best for you? Like, what do you find to be particularly valuable in terms of resources for site management, or even coordinators for that matter?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of us would know it seems to change annually, at least.
Right.
All of the tools that are out there now, they're they're growing rapidly. So it's nice from my standpoint, background as a CRA, because we're generally easily exposed to that stuff, exposed to different sites that are trying out different models or different companies. As where if you run a site, I mean, you need to specifically look for those things, and if they're not coming to you. Um, but yeah, I mean, realistically, that concept of how am I going to make this work was my biggest struggle in planning. How are we going to make it possible? Because we wanted to do it. We came together like let's do it, but how? And that took time. Actually, I talked with you before I even started my company too, to just see, hey, how are you making it happen? But ultimately, the way that it worked for me was drinking the Kool-Aid too. Was Viva Site Vault, because everything was remote and manageable. It was something that I'm very, very familiar working in Viva with ETMF, CTMS as a CRA, and how those things are now connected with Site Vault. Um, I did my one-off little comment about training and saying I do a Batman voice, and that just spiraled from there. I had conversations with Bree Burks with Viva, and she just opened my eyes to this whole world of what Site Vault really can do. Because I mean, I've been aware of it as a CRA, but you never dive down to the levels of, how much do you pay for this? It's not something you're going to
Right.
ask.
Right.
So with Viva being free, 21 CFR, all that stuff is compliant. They provide you with validation documents. They template SOPs to help you integrate and upload documents. Um, uploading documents, doing all the training, that stuff I'm already familiar with, and the workflows and e-signatures. I've been doing that for years, but with Site Vault, it really made it possible. So, once we start those initial contracts with our physicians, we'll just load up all the documentation we know we're going to need for startup and roll right into study specifics from there.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. I didn't know, I first introduced to Viva, how much of a presence they had on the sponsor or CRO side.
Yeah.
I had no idea at all. I'd heard of SiteVault, had used it a little bit. Uh, but yeah, I mean, to already sort of have that familiarity, and then be like, hey, obviously there's a free site, solution. And look, there are free site solutions out there, but a
Sure.
lot of them suck, to be perfectly honest. They're not good. And
Yeah.
Viva's easy. And I hate to say this, but for if you're a site, you kind of need it to be stupid and easy. And I don't mean stupid in any sort of
Yeah.
derogatory way. I mean, it needs to be simple. And it certainly, look, obviously I'm a Vivaite. I don't know, Viva. You tell me what you
Yeah.
guys call yourselves, but
Yeah. We'll get
uh,
that about it.
so yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, and for you, I mean, you're not on site all day, right? You're not
Right.
sitting around at site
Yeah.
shuffling
No.
paperwork around. So like, you don't have the
Absolutely.
luxury of relying on paper, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that said as well. Essentially, the way we have designed our SMO is, we're able to assist with any need. So I want to reach out to smaller community physicians. Whoever wants to conduct research should be able to conduct research. And that's essentially what our goal is. So whether they're going to have their own nursing staff there and they just need some regulatory help, they need help, negotiating contracts, getting studies, we can assist with all that. Whether we need to fully staff a physician's office group with, coordinators, on-site regulatory individuals, whatever it may be. We can scale however we need. But with Viva, even in the background from the other side of the country, I can constantly have oversight. We can do, e-consents. There's all kinds of stuff that can be done through Viva. Source can be put in there. It's just, I feel like it would be impossible without it, at least for me. I haven't found another solution that would have made it possible.
Sure. Well, I think it's interesting, to your point. I mean, obviously the tools that help keep us remote, like Viva, but it's I'm with you. I mean, we do very similar. We have very similar models from what I understand. It's about making the barrier of entry as low as possible for physicians who want to participate, right? And that's something you kind of just got me thinking about is, and I've observed, especially more and more recently, is it's extremely challenging, I think, to scale that, because the needs of every physician or clinic are very different from each other. And not just that, but there's office politics and company cultures and relationships that have to be well maintained. You can't really just slap a standard operating procedure into a clinic and be like, okay, done, here you go, you're good to go now. I think that's really interesting, as you're seeing some of these like really big, well-funded IROs. But then I think there's a lot of people like us around the country too who have sort of smaller, I don't know what you want to call them, boutique or just local, or yeah, like that does sound classy. But you know what I'm saying? Like it just occurs to me that I think that in order to really succeed, I think that level of like white glove has to exist. I mean, I don't know what you've experienced so far in your your dealings, but I feel like it's a pain, but that's really what it requires, for better or worse.
Yeah, it's the only way. It's the only way to make it work. I mean, I can't approach a small physician in the sense of discussing what we need to do in some rural town and just say, this is what you're going to get, and you're getting these coordinators and blah, blah, blah. No, I mean, we're going to make it work. So
I love it. Well, let's take we do have a question, so let's take that. Judith, thank you. Wondering, looking at switching career paths from medicine to clinical research, and wondering what an appropriate entry level role would be. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what exactly you did in medicine or are doing in medicine. It's probably going to have a big part of it.
Right.
And I'll say, look, I mean, I'm a site guy. I've been a site guy my whole career. I never had any interest in being a CRA. I feel like that's just not in my wheelhouse. I couldn't do it.
You don't like to travel.
I don't like to travel. I also just like, I don't know. It's just too, like, I'm a big picture guy. I don't love the details. If I have to coordinate a trial, which I still do, it's like I have to really force myself to be very detail oriented in the things that I do, and I don't always succeed. So, at a site level, obviously, research coordinator. I mean, if you've already got a medical background, I love to hire people who don't have research experience, but have some clinical, MAs are great. I love hiring MAs. I love hiring LPNs. You've got the medical background. I can teach you the research. But I don't know, on the other side of things, I know that there are some programs with some CROs that will, I think, is it Apex program with like,
so there's lots of CRA like boot camps that you can get into. I know getting into clinical trial management as a CTA, that's definitely something that would be a reasonable stepping point, depending on, again, where you are at in your field of medicine. But that scales all the way up to, if you're a physician, to be a principal investigator. But I mean, aside from CRO and site level, there's also that sponsor end as well. So don't shy away from taking a look at small biotechs or any other sponsors out there, because there's a lot of positions floating around.
That's true. And there's a lot of opportunities right now too, it seems like. I mean, I know that, a lot of companies are tightening up and even laying off right now, but there's still, it still seems like a lot of opportunity. So this is actually an interesting question that I still at times struggle with is how you prepare a physician to use any electronic binder and to have oversight. We work with really the whole spectrum of physicians, from guys who are super tech savvy to guys who
Yeah,
are saying, I'm not going to check my cell phone. I'm not checking my email.
their flip phone. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I know for us, it's been unfortunately, a mixed bag. But it's also sort of eventually push comes to shove when you say, look, if we're going to do this, this is what you're going to have to do. This is the expectation, for better or worse. I don't know what you've experienced so far.
Yeah, and Clara, I think the big point there too, at least for me, would be on those initial stages, those early conversations that we're building the relationship. It's going to be in the forefront. I'm not going to hold back expectations just to try to get some. Oh, we want to make the relationship work. So you need to have an understanding. You need to set expectations and boundaries, etc., from the get go. So if they're not coming to the table with an open mind and a willingness to get involved in research, I'm not going to force them into it. But if they want to get involved, they also need to understand that you need to be able to do X, Y, Z. These are your expectations as a physician getting involved in research. There's a lot on the line for PIs. It trickles down to everybody else on the team, but not nearly as much. So,
Yeah. And, I think it's it's sometimes difficult to suss this out. But look, obviously we need more physicians in clinical research. I mean, I think there's, go read statistics and everything else. It's crazy how many aren't participating or are sort of the one and dones, if you will.
yeah,
Um, part of that is, again, making that easy for them. But you also have to recognize the fact that not every physician is cut out to be a good PI.
yeah,
And we've we've worked with those, and unfortunately, sometimes learned too late. But I think it's important, as you point out, sort of in those beginning uh, relationship sort of starting points to really start to try to suss that out as best you can. If you got someone who's not going to be responsive or not be
right.
on top of their stuff, then they may not be good candidates to be PIs.
In a way, that's the other benefit almost to having an electronic regulatory system is, we can build in those signatures that are going to require them to log in. So whether they read the document or not, you know, there's that sense of responsibility. I hope they just have good integrity, but that they got in there and they're acknowledging, yeah, I saw this, signing off on it. That's a big plus with electronic docs, I think, as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've got some like proven oversight in
Proven
a way,
oversight,
right? Right.
exactly.
Like, look, they logged in, they signed it, you know.
Right.
But to your point, whether they read every word or not, you know, well,
Yeah.
who's to say? But Gilda, this will be posted afterwards. It'll be available in case you missed it. So no worries about that there. We had some questions before the show, and I know one that I've seen someone struggle with is like, is there any perceived conflicts of interest being, on sort of having your foot in both camps as a CRA as well as somebody who's involved at sites? And if so, is that CRO is cool with that, or how do you sort of navigate that?
Yeah. So, specific shout out then to Aubrey, a fellow former paramedic who's in clinical research. So, I know that's definitely got to be top of mind for a lot of individuals. But working with a CRO, there's tons of training I have to go through here as it is. I understand our processes. There's certain steps that are in place with every CRO that exists that, there are checks, there are processes. So there's no way, I mean, whether I was involved as a co-founder with a new e-thingy, and I was getting into the tech game, there's still a process. It's not like, oh, hey, this is something Mitch is doing, so we're going to use it. That's not how it works. It's people I would have no contact with, especially at our scale.
Is it you're not out here awarding yourself new studies and then
Yeah,
checking
yeah,
checking your site's
exactly.
own work? You're not doing that.
Exactly. And then from that site level standpoint as well, I think there's just that, and there's that responsibility, right, as a business owner, where if I saw that there might be a perceived conflict, if we had a sponsor reach out to us and it's a sponsor that I might end up being involved with on the CRO side as a CRA, then it may sound weird that, well, we're not going to take that study. We're not going to try
Sure.
to go for that study, but there's plenty of others out there. So
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly no shortage of opportunities if you have to potentially, recuse yourself every now and again from from a study. That you're going to be okay, most likely. I know this was a question that someone else, Jeff, I believe, Jeff Park had asked.
yeah,
You know, tools out there for CRAs in terms of checklists or guidance on how to manage documents. And I guess
yeah.
for me, obviously, I've never been a CRA. I always assumed that CROs would have that sort of stuff like generated, but maybe that's not the case.
They tend to. I
Okay.
know Jeff and I've been talking uh, through LinkedIn and whatnot as well. So I know he's actually trying to put together some pretty exciting stuff. Um, so there are. I mean, they exist. I I don't have something specifically to share, obviously right now, but I'm happy to talk through steps with you, Jeff, specifically, or really anybody probably. Um, but they definitely exist, and if they didn't exist, you make it, right,
Yeah,
make your own
that's it, right?
checklist.
I like it, Clara. So, I mean, this is not always clear to me either, how site feedback makes its way back to a sponsor. And I know, I'm on the site, on site every day, and we have these conversations with CRA. And it's not always clear to me if that ever goes anywhere, and look, it's probably case by case. I'm sure CRAs deal with a lot of complaining from sites, and they probably, you know, don't always necessarily funnel that back up the chain, right?
Right, I think that's a good point. I mean, there's some stuff that we talk about or I hear when I'm at sites, but at the same sense, not everything is something I'm not going to regurgitate everything that you say up the chain, because
Sure.
it probably doesn't need to be. But if it's something that would actually need to be escalated, then hopefully you're doing a good job and you're actually escalating those issues. If you have a problem with a vendor, sponsors want to know about it, absolutely. But also then a quick note too, that then all the sites, you have contact information. So if you feel like communication is lacking, reach out to someone else. I mean, look, open your binder. There should be a list of contacts right there in the front of your reg binder. So reach out to
Yeah, and
somebody.
yeah, I admit not always doing enough due diligence. I mean, look, it's tough as a site too, because frankly, if I've got 3 studies and one is, you know, not that not going that well, I'm not really getting that much support on it, but one is kicking ass and enrolling a bunch of patients, and I've got good support, and I'm probably not going to necessarily take my time to go track down somebody from the difficult study. I'm just going to put my time into the good study that's going really well, right? So I
Yeah.
think that can be challenging too, and I've been guilty of that. Only to later have the conversation and be like, well, crap, I should have said that 6 months ago instead of waiting around. But I mean,
Right.
the fact of the matter is, sites are not they're often strapped for both time and money. So you sort
Right.
of
Right.
you go with what's working.
Yeah, I mean that 100% makes sense. But I do know that sponsors want things to work. Nobody wants their trial to fail. So if there's ever any problems with tools or resources, try to speak up. I mean, you would know that you're getting feedback if you receive a response to your feedback, I would guess.
Maybe there needs to be like an anonymous like suggestion box, for the sponsor
I
to.
don't know. That might
I'd
not
say
go well.
that could get ugly, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
The role of the site pharmacist underrated. I wonder, are they underrated? I wonder how. I'd like to hear more about why you think they're underrated and in the guidance to change this. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. If you have more specific Let me see.
Well, I think, again, it probably depends very much on your site structure. I mean, and the types of trials you're running,
It's
because
wildly different.
overwhelmingly, a lot of outpatient drug, with ambient storage. I mean, you don't
No,
necessarily have a separate pharmacy team,
you don't.
unless you're part of a university or something
Right.
like that. In which case, uh, you know, I don't know if underrated, but in my experience, it's sometimes communication's not good. You've got somebody who's sort of separate from the normal, coordinator staff, and that can get very challenging, I think.
Yeah,
So
but
there's
then
Go
again, I
ahead.
mean, I mean, I would say with my experience, it really just varies as far as that communication. It varies by structure. So I've had many sites where essentially they're aware of my visit, and when confirming when I'm going to be there, that it's on the site staff, it's on the coordinator to schedule time with the pharmacy, so I can meet with the pharmacist, we can review IP, etc. But there's others where I'll communicate directly with the pharmacy. They might have an electronic system. Um, so it really depends. I don't think they're underrated or underappreciated. I'm not sure where that's headed, but there's definitely value to it in the specific need, but not. It's just not a need all the time, though.
I'll say, I mean, in your experience, I don't know what kind of trials you know, are on generally, but how often is the coordinator just also a pharmacist?
Uh,
You know,
the majority of the time.
pharmacist. Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. You have.
But
I
again,
mean, you have
since
a pharmacy binder,
right, right.
pharmacy manuals, but it's not a specific pharmacist
Yeah,
that's
and
going to be
since
filling out
leaving
IP.
academia, I really haven't. I mean, it's been the case pretty much. We're doing some oncology now with a big, center, and obviously that gets a little more complex, right? You start,
100%.
dealing with, mixing and storing and in a lot different ways. So I can see that getting more complex or a little bit more involved, I guess, so to speak.
Right. Oh, I mean, it's required at that point. So,
Sure, sure. I just keep it in my backpack. Is that not?
yeah, yeah.
Is that not okay?
Walking around with you know, your narcotics.
Right. So I mean, how long has the SMO been up and running? Where are you guys at there?
Since early second quarter this year. I
Nice.
think we finally put everything together around April, May, um, and I'm busy, so it's not like we've been flying off the shelf. Um,
Sure.
there has to be the awareness to the community. So um, we reach out to people, we have conversations, schedule meetings when we can, but um, it sounds bad, like it's my own company, but it's like a side gig. But it's not. I mean, I just have two full-time jobs.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Mine was a side gig for a while until it wasn't,
yeah, until you get to a certain point, I suppose. And
Well, and I think
absolutely, that's
to
how
your
that's how
point
it would be.
though, I mean, I think it's, it feels counterintuitive because you want to go hard and you want to open a bunch of sites and you want to grab a bunch of study opportunities, but you really, again, unless you are like well funded and you know what the hell you're doing, you really can't do that. You
Right.
really slow and steady, I think, is the key. And I mean, you've already hinted at it, but I think maintaining and nurturing the relationships with your physicians, with the clinic staff, with the community, are, you know a big underappreciated part of what we do in terms of making it successful, right?
Yeah,
Anybody can
absolutely.
walk in and say, we're going to do trials with you, but the difference between it succeeding and failing is oftentimes, I mean, does the PI like you?
Yeah,
Because if the PI doesn't like you, he's not going to want to work with you.
yeah, you're
You can
absolutely right.
get all the studies you want, you know, but
Yeah,
and if the community doesn't trust you, and you can't get people to participate in your trial, then who cares how many names you have on a list?
yeah, yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, I think so. So early on, for us, I mean, with making the early connections with physicians, there's not an extreme rush. Like we're going to get it going next week, or we don't want to set deadlines. I mean, to some degree, at least, you don't want to set deadlines, but um, with our structure and being able to provide a wide array of needs to meet a site's needs. It's kind of evolving, right? So we can bring on additional coordinators if needed, but early on, if we make that connection with a group, and until we get a study lined up, we don't need coordinators. So the overhead is at nothing,
Right.
because we don't make money until they're making money. It's
Right.
kind of how it works.
Yeah. I mean, I've found when you get, luckily for us, we've remained mostly like local to a metro area. Now we work with some sites that are not, so close, but it makes it a little easier for us because we can move staff around between sites. But
Sure.
especially if you're breaking into like a new geography, it is sort of like chicken or the egg, right? Because
Right.
I mean, even when you land a study, you're not guaranteed that that's going to pay the bills or be successful. You
Right.
know,
Right.
I feel like I had this conversation with somebody recently, but it's sort of, I don't want to say it's a game, but it's sort of like you got to get in the game and then,
Yeah.
start establishing and laying down your processes, learning what works well so that when the, great study comes that you can knock out of the park, you've got everything in place. You already know what you're doing. You're not sort of, grasping for straws to make it work. But you got to slowly build into that ability. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely right.
And that can be challenging. I mean, I think, again, I don't know. It's just me. I'm incredibly impatient. I want it to happen yesterday, but
Yeah. I mean, I would be that way. There's definitely a sense of, if I had that ability to quit paying my bills and quit my job,
right.
I would love to maybe just, run my business and then attend all the conferences I can. Just go chat it up with everybody I see on LinkedIn, but it's just not feasible at the same time. So
What's the, I mean, let's say it's 10 years from now. What is your vision, for
retirement.
how, yeah, right. Yeah. Me too.
So the vision, I
Well,
mean, yeah, I think at that point, I would like to have grown enough, um, locally throughout the U.S., et cetera, wherever that takes us. I'm open to it. Um, Getting the philosophy of things, the Tao Te Ching and Stoicism. It's kind of how I've developed my own personal and business philosophies. Is you essentially need to accept things as they are. So if they're growing, I don't want to inhibit them. That's why we want to be able to have a good scale and amazing relationships with recruitment companies, because we need to get staff. So,
sure.
um, but ultimately, I would like to get to the point where I'm so busy that I need other people to take over a lot of my tasks to make me not as busy. Uh, I think that's kind of the goal for most that are starting out a company in a way,
Sure.
as
Well, I
long
think
as
this is,
everything is smoothly running, right?
yeah, I think this is an interesting, and so, this is sort of an interesting field in a way because I think a lot, not all, but a lot of the people starting sites and site networks are, people like me and you. I mean, we're in the industry.
Right.
We're not entrepreneurs per se, right? We're more specialists or experts in what we do and are just trying to sort of make an extension of that while another segment is just trying to build a business and flip it and go home and be
Right.
done. You know what I'm saying? And
Right.
I don't know, for me, it's like I've never really considered selling, but there's a ton of consolidation, going on even now. So,
That's true.
that's sort of
That's true.
interesting.
I think, as it evolves, if we grow amazingly well, that would be phenomenal. And then, finding some other things that are more at our values along the lines of philanthropy or more community outreach that we can do, anything to try to make a bigger impact in a positive way. If I can get to the point where I can focus heavily on that, that would be ideal.
Oh, that makes perfect sense to me. Let's take a couple other questions here. Stuart. What's up, Stuart? I'm not a huge conference goer myself. I don't know about you, but have you seen, much
I
sort of
I want to be a
benefit or
conference goer. I haven't been, um, but I can't wait to get out there.
I guess it depends on, what your particular goal is, in terms of ROI. Like look, I have criticism of a lot of conferences because frankly, I don't want to go basically walk through advertising and marketing.
Yeah.
I like to talk about this stuff. I like to learn what other people are doing. I like to, I just like to sort of, get a grip for where the industry is and what can I learn from people. And
Right.
I'm learning more and more. I can do that in forums like this.
Right.
I do appreciate the ability to shake somebody's hand or have a drink with them, in person. And, that's great. But I can sort of fulfill a lot of what I value out of conferences and things like this. So
Yeah.
for me,
Yeah.
it's sort of a meh, do I get an ROI? Yeah, probably. And I've met, I got to meet some great people in Vegas at Magi. So I'm thankful for that. But,
Right.
I can also, I can talk to them. I can talk to them just like this.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the point. What we have here on LinkedIn, I made so many amazing connections in the community. And then also just through regular business on the CRO level, I've met so many people throughout the country and try to just build those relationships when you can. So it's interesting. That's another kind of new area as well, is trying to approach things from like an ROI level or an ad spend like that. That's not generally something that's going to be in my wheelhouse. I know the terms, but it's building a relationship with me. I don't I don't look at them as like
Right.
I'm not investing
Like
in
transactional per
knowing
se,
someone.
right?
Yeah, it's like you.
Right.
I don't think I wouldn't put an ROI on knowing Brad Hightower if I met you at a conference. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's I
How do
don't
you put a
know.
price on
It's a
that?
bear market, so it could be down. Value's down right now. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you there. There's another interesting question, Clara. Thank you. Is there a Goldilocks size of site? This is interesting to me because I think there is. I think there probably is. And I've seen it before. I've seen companies make mistakes because they're trying to expand. They sign up, too many doctors, land trials that don't make money, losing money, and run
True.
themselves right out of business. Right? Obviously, that's too big. You don't want to do that, but you don't want to be too small. You want to be diversified enough because after a class of drugs, what tends to happen is you get a class of drugs that everyone's trying to get approved, and
Right.
then once
Right.
they're gone, if you're not in a different therapeutic area, you may not be able to pivot and keep stream of income coming in. So I think there probably is, and it probably varies. There's a big range there, but I think you don't want to be too big or too little.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I think with our model and our design, our goal is more to integrate research into physicians' practices. So we're not going to have or at least currently, that's not on our target list of having our own, Kenzona Clinical Research, shopping mall of research. So I
I
think
mean,
down the road that would be great for like
ideally,
phase ones.
wouldn't you want to have varied practices?
Yeah.
Rather than you don't want to have 10 cardiology practices. You'd like to
Right.
have
Right.
2 cardiology, 2 GI.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. Like that's at our core as well, is trying to be able to deliver and facilitate research to the people who otherwise aren't participating. So if I just start opening up centers in specific locations, then that would almost defeat my purpose.
Fair. Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's a interesting nuance, of what we do is like,
Yeah.
again, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should, right?
Right. Right. But when we talk about scale, though, I mean, look at universities. I mean, they're massive on a scale, or institutions like MD Anderson, giant facilities. I mean, you basically be your own town, um, getting lost on that campus. So
Yeah, but I mean,
scale works
does it? I mean,
sometimes.
I
Sometimes.
think sometimes, yeah. And look, there's obviously very successful large institutions who do research, but I mean, just as many, if not more, lose a bunch of money
Right.
and aren't very efficient. I mean, many times I worked at a university, I would wait 10 months for an IRB approval and watch the study close while I was, responding to the IRB. So
Yeah.
sometimes they can be,
Yeah.
models of inefficiency, but, at the same time, to your point, have all the infrastructure that make them perfect, but still
Right.
somehow managed to sort of like fumble the bag there.
Well, it evolves. I mean, if you're not evolving as you're growing, you're not going to grow. You're going to get to a certain point where you just you're failing as a
Sure.
company. So, and every time we add an employee, it's probably should feel like a complete workover. I would imagine in my mind. To your point, Brad, as well, is the communication. There's so many additional barriers and levels and structure changes that have to take place while growing in size. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility being functional. Obviously they do function at a large level.
Of
It's
course,
just
yeah.
a lot of constant change and growth and accepting the new changes.
Well, that's unfortunately not something clinical research necessarily has
No.
is super successful at, right? Like we love to dig our heels in. I say
Oh
we,
yeah.
but the royal we, love to dig our heels in and be like, nope, this is how we do things. Please stop it. This is how it's done. And
Yeah.
to that end, I kind of want to know, look, DCT, sick of talking about it, but I'm still very fascinated by sort of people's interpretation, and then how they think that's going to really play out. And you've got a little unique aspect because you kind of see what's happening on the CRO side in addition to sites. I mean, what are you seeing?
Yeah. So in the realm of DCTs, I mean that's evolving. It feels like constantly as well. There's always new information every week about DCTs. So um, I had a conversation or was involved in a conversation recently with the discussion of like the Walgreens or CVS, that aspect of DCTs and trying to bring research closer to individuals and what that might take away from that site perspective. And my point was, I think we're only at the state now where it's more or less like a home health option.
Right.
DCTs, in my mind, I can't see them totally taking over. They're not going to dominate the industry because there's also a specific niche. I mean, you're not going to run an oncology trial through DCT. It's not feasible. You can't
Sure.
make that happen. So there are needs that sites have to be able to meet that DCTs just simply can't. But I do think it's amazing. And I mean, I don't want to just bring research and give research opportunities to physicians, in smaller communities or rural areas. You're also reaching a different patient base and a human population that they're not going to drive an hour and a half, to the university, the nearest large town, just to do a research trial. So
Right.
if a DCT can help because they can run down to the Walgreens, awesome. I'm all for that working successfully.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do think it'll be, for me, I think the future or a successful future is a good combination of those two things. It's more community physicians and community involvement in addition to more of these DCT methodologies or whatever you want to call them.
Right.
Right now all the hype is on the sexy technology versus the you know let's go out and spin up rural sites and get to patients who've never had access to clinical trials before.
Right.
So I think
Exactly.
that's interesting. Stuart, you're gonna get me in trouble, Stuart. Decentralized trials using digital tools they already have, right? Well, it depends on if you, and I mean, it depends on whose definition of the DCT you subscribe to, I guess. I've
Right.
had that conversation with Craig Lipset, sort of godfather of the movement in a way, I guess, if you want to call him that. I mean, his assertion, and he don't know that he's wrong, is that digital tools and technology don't really have anything to do with decentralized trials necessarily. It's more about the location of where things are happening, whether that be through a digital tool or through a human being, I
Right.
guess, being there or getting drugs shipped to you. I mean, that's not necessarily a huge technology advancement. As to where, I sort of originally believed it to be more about the data collection being done, like, using an e-diary, I would consider a DCT tool because you're collecting data not on site.
Yeah.
But to them, or to him, if that's not replacing a site visit, it's not really DCT. So
Right.
Again, I struggle with the methodology or the definitions, and sometimes I keep telling myself I'm just going to stop talking about it, but you know,
You can't.
you can't. I mean,
The
it
people
is. It
won't let
is.
you.
Well, I also think it is. Look, I don't know. I'm not smart enough for this, so at some point, there's a line between convenience and science, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I don't know where that line is. I do believe that trials should be easier for everyone, really. But at some point, where's the line at which we're sort of, not being sufficiently scientifically rigorous, right? Like, I don't know.
Mhm.
If anybody can just do a trial from their couch, use whatever data collection techniques they want, I mean, at what point does that break down,
Yeah, yeah. We'll wait for a response to that from the FDA.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, I guess that's what they're trying to figure out to some degree, but
Absolutely.
I have trouble reconciling those two things in my mind. And again, you ask me tomorrow, I might have a different answer. Some days I'm like, you know what? It's all about the patients, but let's be honest. It's not all about the patients. It's all about the sponsors getting the data they need to get their drug approved, to be perfectly honest.
Well, I mean, that's realistically, you're right. I mean, that's why patients are participating in clinical trials. That's the whole consent process. Um, I know I got scolded yesterday, I think, for referring to something you had posted
Oh,
regarding a
called them a
subject
subject, right?
instead of a person. But the terminology exists for the purpose. Once someone consents to a trial, they are consenting to be a
Yeah.
subject. So,
Well, and I mean, it's a whole nother conversation. We're getting close to the end of the hour, but like the whole idea of research
next
as a
time.
care option, right? Like,
Yeah,
I, I mean, you are getting into sort of therapeutic misconception and a
absolutely.
whole host of other potential problems. And again, let's not kid ourselves. Look, we can make the clinical trial experience, uh, you know, a certain level of beneficial for research participants, but it's not for them. That's very
Right.
clear. It's not for
Right.
them. So,
Right.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. This isn't about patient convenience. It's about how can we more quickly get this drug to market so that,
Sure.
then we
Sure.
can help. Then we can help more people
Yeah,
with it.
exactly. On the financial end, it's for the sponsors, but I think in the long term scope, at least from the sponsor perspective, like I I don't I don't think I've had interactions with sponsors where it's purely monetary. I mean, obviously there's goals, there's investors. It's a pain, but everybody who works with sponsors in R&D all the way through ClinOps, they want to be able to make a difference. They want to be able to save lives, change lives, improve quality of living. No one's there like, ooh, I can make some money off of people. That's not the
No,
target.
but I mean, at the same time, though, if DCTs prove to be more expensive but easier for patients, what do you think will happen? Do you think that they'll say, you know what, we'll spend the extra money to make it easier for patients?
It's a good question. If they're able to get more patients potentially,
Yeah, fair enough. Fair
because I
enough.
mean, we both know from a site level as well that a lot of money gets spent on advertising as is. So
That's a fair point. Fair point. Yes, Noah, thank you. I just they're not all trials are industry sponsored. That's a perfectly fair point. And
yeah,
living outside
absolutely.
of academia, I lose
Yeah.
that perspective a lot of times. So I can totally understand that.
Yeah, that's further outside of my visual field when you approach that aspect of DCT to a non-industry sponsored. I mean, yeah, that's more
Sure.
more difficult of an aspect, I would imagine.
I mean, for sure, there's interest in DCT from groups that are interested in inclusion and diversity. I mean, I guess my concern is not that some people's hearts aren't in the right place. Not at all. I'm not trying to make a blanket statement saying that making more money. I mean, come on.
We're all young,
But I
maybe.
think that if a sponsor is going to choose, I have to go out on a limb and guess they're generally going to pick the one that is not going to lose them money. And again, that's obviously a super overgeneralized statement. So
Yeah,
I'm not trying to be too cynical. No, I'm sorry.
it's been a long
And
week. We understand.
right. Let's see. Should there be a remote visit option to a protocol or separate DCT and in-person protocol? So yeah, so many questions about data integrity. And now I worry about that myself. I don't know. I don't know that. I mean, I think there should just be some remote visit options built into protocols, rather than here's a whole different way to do. I mean, I feel like that's going to be asking for
I mean,
problems. But
that happens. I mean, there's
right,
protocols that exist that have remote visits, or home health visits to that point as well. It's a form of remote. I think that was my point with kind of how I currently see it, is more of like a home health. It's an option on how do we modify our current existing protocols or new protocols that are coming up to make them more accessible. But um, I I think with DCT, it's a specific approach. I don't think it's a modification per se.
right. Yeah, and again, I think the idea is that eventually, like nothing, DCT won't even be a thing. It'll just be how we do clinical trials with options and flexibility sort of built into these protocols, which
Yeah,
doesn't seem far fetched. It really
right.
doesn't. So
No, not at all.
we'll see as I mean, look, it's going to be a really exciting few years, I think, and beyond, obviously. But I think we're at some point going to hit some kind of inflection point to where the stuff's it's either going to start taking off, or we're going to do that thing where we sort of, forget about it, and it takes
Right,
on another life as a new buzzword.
right.
All right, Mitchell, man, thank you so much for coming on. We're getting kind of down to the end here. Is
We
there
are.
anything, any shout outs, any plugs, anything you want to make here as we close up?
Um, I guess I want to be more humble than that. I feel like, but yeah. I mean, if anybody's obviously interested in getting the research or knows physicians that have an interest, haven't been involved, um, reach out. I mean, Kenzona Clinical Research.com, or I'm all over LinkedIn there every day. So easy to connect with.
We didn't even talk about the clinical research Avengers.
Oh yeah, the Clinical Research Justice League. You're absolutely right.
Justice League, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally different universe, by the way, than the
I
Avengers. So,
yeah, I'm not at all familiar with any of
um,
that, so you got me there.
yeah, so that was a fun little group, with the whole clinical research Batman thing. Um, I tried to start this organization on LinkedIn, the Clinical Research Justice League, and essentially the goal there is to try to develop. Not that I don't like checking out all of Brad's posts, um, but I wanted to try to have a core group where people can come and get all things controversial regarding ethics and equality, in research industry. So feel free to check that out. Join the club.
I love it. All right, man. Well, thank you, and I know Gabby, you booked on for a regular podcast session as well, so everybody keep an eye open for that. All right, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad.
Yep, you
Thanks,
guys have a
everybody.
good one. Thanks everyone for tuning in.